When I first bought the remote 10-acre plot up in the Cascade foothills, I thought I'd found paradise. Nestled between towering pines and the edge of a spring-fed lake, the land was outside of any official zoning district or development corporation. No utilities, no traffic, no neighbors, exactly how I wanted it. As a software developer burnt out from city life, my goal was to build a small, off-grid cabin and get away on weekends to hike, fish, and disconnect. The permit process had been straightforward. The county signed off since it was unincorporated land, and after 6 months of groundwork, I had a rustic but cozy log cabin with solar panels, a water catchment system, and even Starlink internet. It was the kind of quiet simplicity that city folk romanticize but never commit to. That changed the moment I started noticing tire tracks near my property line and a few unfamiliar faces scouting the area with clipboards and walkie-talkies. I soon found out that a new luxury housing development had sprung up 3 miles down the ridge, and the newly formed WA from that community, Clearwater Pines Estates, had apparently decided that the entire valley, including my land, was now part of their aesthetic jurisdiction. I laughed when I first heard it from a neighbor who was being harassed about his mailbox not being WA approved. They sent me a notice for having a wooden chicken coop, he'd said, shaking his head. Like it's a country club or something. But I figured they couldn't touch me. My land was far outside their plat map, I had no shared roads, no easements, and my deed made no mention of any community association. It wasn't just off-grid in power and water, it was off-grid legally. But I underestimated how far entitled people with money and influence would go to feel in control. The first notice came by mail, stuffed in a bright orange envelope with a gold-embossed seal. Notice of violation, unauthorized structure construction in Clearwater Pines jurisdiction. It claimed I had violated neighborhood building code standards and owed $2,500 immediately for non-compliance, with $500 added for each additional week the violation remained unresolved. I nearly choked on my coffee laughing. I immediately called the number on the letter and was met with a smug voice identifying herself as Karen Duvall, the WA president. She spoke with the confidence of a politician, telling me my log structure was an eyesore and not up to Clearwater Pines standards. When I informed her that I didn't live in Clearwater Pines, her tone hardened. Our community voted to expand the protective jurisdiction to include properties within a 5-mile aesthetic perimeter, she said smugly. You fall within that boundary now, and we're authorized to issue fines. I contacted the county recorder's office, and they confirmed what I already knew: the WA had no jurisdiction over my land. I even had it in writing. I sent the documentation to Karen and her compliance board, telling them in no uncertain terms to leave me alone. That should have been the end of it, but these people weren't just petty. They were relentless. Over the next 3 months, I received 9 separate violation letters, each escalating in tone and penalty. They started docking me for imaginary offenses like non-standard window shutters and lack of HOA-approved landscaping. The total fine reached a ridiculous $70,000, and they had the nerve to slap a lien notice on the gatepost of my property, hand-delivered, not legally filed. It was all a scare tactic, but that didn't make it any less infuriating. These people were playing a game, and they weren't used to someone playing back. Things took a turn when I posted about the ordeal on a local Facebook group. My post went viral in the area: screenshots of the fine letters, pictures of the cabin, and a photo of Karen Duvall at one of her infamous clipboard inspections. To my surprise, I received dozens of messages from other residents who had also been harassed by the WA, many of whom lived outside the official Clearwater Pines area. One man said they fined him for having an RV parked in his own barn, a barn built in 1978, long before the WA existed. Another said his elderly mother was threatened with property seizure unless she paid for a road paving project she never agreed to. Clearly, I wasn't the only one. But I had something they didn't: documentation proving they had no legal claim to my land. Karen didn't like the sudden attention. A week after the post went viral, I came up to the cabin to find my gate smashed open, a tire on my ATV slashed, and one of my solar panels shattered. It was vandalism, plain and simple. I called the sheriff and filed a report, even handing over a USB of motion camera footage showing 2 WA board members, including Karen's vice president, on my property after dark. I thought that would be enough to scare them off. Instead, the WA doubled down. I got a letter from their lawyer threatening to sue me for defamation and unlawful obstruction of community policy enforcement. The final straw came when they filed an actual civil suit against me, not just for the $70,000 in fake fines, but for disruption of WA business operations and emotional distress to board members. They picked the wrong guy to intimidate. What they didn't know, or had forgotten, was that my brother was a state judge, and I had already built a solid paper trail. With my brother's advice, I countersued, not just for harassment, but for trespassing, vandalism, and fraudulent lien attempts. I included affidavits from 6 other landowners who had been harassed similarly and submitted everything from photos, gate camera footage, timestamps, and county zoning documents. The judge assigned to the case, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Mendez, immediately questioned the legitimacy of the HOA's jurisdiction claims. During the first hearing, Karen and her legal team strolled in with a thick binder of community planning maps they had designed themselves, none of which were recognized by the county or state. The judge called them out on it, and Karen, in full Karen fashion, exploded in the courtroom, shouting about how the valley must be preserved, and how outsiders ruin property values. By the third hearing, the judge had heard enough. Not only did she dismiss the HOA's lawsuit with prejudice, but she also referred Karen and 2 board members for criminal investigation over perjury, property damage, and impersonating a public official, due to the fake compliance officer badges they used during their unlawful inspections. The court later learned that the WA had been collecting illegal fines from more than 20 homeowners and had used the money to pay for private retreats, landscaping their own yards, and even Karen's hot tub repair. The sheriff's office raided the Clearwater Pines WA office 2 weeks later. By the time the dust settled, Karen and her top board members were in handcuffs, not just disgraced, but facing serious time. News of the courtroom ruling spread faster than wildfire in a dry forest. Within 48 hours of the judge's decision, local news stations picked up the story. WA Overreach Lands Board in Criminal Investigation, read the headline. Karen Duvall's mugshot made it to the front page of 2 regional newspapers, her tight bun slightly frazzled and her expression more shocked than remorseful. The same woman who had arrogantly stormed my property with a clipboard and fake badge was now being paraded through court halls in handcuffs. And it wasn't just her. Vice President Ross Talbot and Treasurer Linda Phelps, the same 2 caught on my gate camera, were arrested alongside her for criminal trespass, fraud, and embezzlement. The community of Clearwater Pines, once proud and snobbish about its WA standards, was now neck-deep in scandal. For the first time in years, residents began to speak freely. I was contacted by local journalists, invited to interviews, and asked to provide documentation for follow-up investigations. My inbox was flooded with people thanking me for standing up. One woman revealed she'd been forced to sell her mother's cottage when Karen imposed a daily $200 fine for excessive wind chimes. Another man had been evicted from his own inherited cabin due to non-compliant chimney brick color. These weren't just petty inconveniences. People had lost homes, livelihoods, and peace of mind because of a power-drunk WA board that had declared itself judge, jury, and executioner. Now, for the first time, they were answering to a real judge. And she wasn't messing around. The criminal trial, set 2 months after the civil suit ended, became a media event. The courtroom was packed, not with supporters of the WA, but with neighbors, former residents, and people who had driven hours just to watch Karen Duvall squirm. The DA laid out a damning case. Over $400,000 in illegally collected fines over a 5-year span, hundreds of hours of unauthorized surveillance on private landowners, and multiple falsified compliance records. Worse still, the Clearwater Pines WA had filed fraudulent deeds of easement to extend their control over properties they had no legal claim to. My case was just the one that pulled the curtain back. Turns out, they'd been doing this for years. Karen, desperate and unhinged, tried to claim she was a civil servant protecting the community. Her defense attorney, clearly regretting taking the case, argued that her actions were misguided but not criminal. But Judge Mendez wasn't swayed. With video evidence, bank records, and witness after witness testifying about the mental and financial abuse they'd endured, the outcome was clear. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and criminal trespassing. Ross and Linda took plea deals in exchange for testifying against her. Karen, refusing any deal, was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with restitution to be paid to 32 victims. As the verdict was read, she stood stone-faced, no apology, no shame. I'll never forget what Judge Mendez said to her. Power not only corrupted you, Ms. Duvall, It blinded you to the humanity of the very people you claim to protect. That is not leadership, that is tyranny. With Karen and her cronies behind bars, Clearwater Pines was left without leadership, and the remaining residents wasted no time dissolving the WA altogether. A petition went out, and with overwhelming majority support, the HOA was officially disbanded within 3 months. Several of the remaining board members were banned from holding fiduciary roles in any future association, and others fled the neighborhood entirely, embarrassed or avoiding lawsuits. As for the affected residents, a class action suit was filed to recover stolen money, and I was one of the key witnesses providing documentation. Many families were able to recover a portion of their stolen fines, though some damages ran deeper than money could heal. Meanwhile, back at my cabin, peace returned. The gate was repaired, the ATV was fixed, and my solar system upgraded with better cameras and a stronger battery bank, thanks to a generous donation from a group of fellow landowners. I hosted a small celebration for those who stood by me, complete with grilled fish, firewood smoked chili, and guitars under the stars. It felt like the final closing of a bitter chapter. People brought stories, not just about the WA, but about the strength it takes to push back against organized entitlement. There was healing in those woods. The same place where a corrupt group tried to plant their flag had become a sanctuary again, not just for me, but for everyone they had tried to control. And as for me, I still spend every other weekend up in that cabin, watching sunsets burn through the pines, the wind rustling across my porch, and not a single WA notice in sight. They say you can't fight City Hall, but you can take down a fake tyrant with a clipboard. After the trial, Karen Duvall's name became almost synonymous with WA corruption across the state. Local news stations followed up every few weeks, reporting on the outcomes of appeals, prison intake, and civil settlements. A former suburban queenpin was now inmate number 447,210, doing time in the state penitentiary. According to later reports, she was placed in a medium security facility, where her old control freak habits didn't go over well. Apparently, trying to organize the prison library and assign chores to other inmates led to a few, less than cordial, exchanges with cellmates. Her fall from power wasn't just legal, it was social. Karen's real estate license was revoked, her personal assets were frozen pending restitution payouts, and her once thriving side business in interior design had collapsed under a flood of one-star reviews and refund demands. Clearwater Pines, the neighborhood that once bragged about exclusivity and WA excellence, had been forced into an unplanned rebranding. With the WA officially disbanded, residents voted to rename the community to Cedar Hollow Ridge, shedding its tarnished identity and the toxic legacy Karen had left behind. The new leadership structure was informal, a few rotating volunteers, no fines, no mandatory dues, just communication and mutual respect. What shocked many was how well the place ran without an HOA. Streets were still clean, neighbors maintained their yards, and issues were resolved over coffee rather than citations. It was as if peace had been hiding beneath the surface the whole time, just waiting for the tyrants to be removed. With my name now well known in homeowner circles, I began getting contacted by people all over the country. Emails, calls, even handwritten letters poured in, homeowners who were being threatened, fined, or harassed by out-of-control HOAs who assumed everyone would stay silent. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was someone who'd stood his ground and won, and that meant something. I started a blog called Cabin and Constitution, sharing my case, my evidence, and a step-by-step breakdown of how to check deed restrictions, file countersuits, and expose unlawful WA practices. It blew up faster than I expected. Within 3 months, I was being interviewed on local radio, WA reform forums, and eventually featured in a documentary on property rights. I didn't do it for money, I didn't monetize the site or take donations, but I did create a free downloadable guide called Know Your Deed, Know Your Rights. That guide helped a man in Texas overturn a $10,000 patio fine, and a retired nurse in Arizona stop her WA from seizing her property over windmill decorations. One by one, homeowners started fighting back, armed with paperwork, persistence, and examples of real victories. I became something of a reluctant advocate, not because I sought revenge, but because I knew what silence cost. Karen tried to intimidate me with paper threats, false authority, and fake rules. And she did the same to dozens of others. But when you know how to read a plat map, cite zoning code, and call a bluff, that fear loses its grip. 1 year later, I stood on my cabin deck as a gentle snow fell over the pine forest, warm coffee in hand, and the quiet hum of the solar inverter behind me. The place looked almost identical to when I first built it, rustic, peaceful, alive with birds and wind. But I had changed. I was no longer just a quiet guy escaping the city, I was someone who had been forced to fight for peace, and won. What started as a personal retreat had turned into the center of a national conversation. It amazed me how something so small, a cabin, could spark a movement, expose corruption, and lead to real reform. But more than that, it gave people hope. I still get visitors sometimes, neighbors, journalists, old friends, people who bring food, stories, and questions. We sit around the fire pit, not talking about Karen, but about freedom. About property. About how easy it is to give up your power when someone in a suit tells you that you have none. But now, more and more people are learning they do have rights. They just need to dig deep enough to find them. And as for Clearwater Pines, excuse me, Cedar Hollow Ridge, it's doing just fine without Karen's iron fist. Families are moving back in, gardens are growing again, and kids are playing without anyone measuring the height of their tree swing. That's the legacy I care about, not the fight, not the win, but the freedom it left behind.